let's get into epistemology, because I think epistemology is one of the areas that, as theologians, we typically go for immediately. So we'll get into some epistemology. How about that? So we'll go epistemology. Okay. And so what we want to discuss in epistemology, so this has to do with knowledge, right? Obviously, I'm not a speller. Knowledge, right? So, epistis, knowledge, ology, study of knowledge, right? Okay. So in epistemology, one of the fundamental questions is, what is truth? Okay. I don't want to really focus on truth. I want to focus on knowledge. So how do we know something is true, right? How do we come to know something? And so there are going to be two major divisions. So there's going to be empiricism. So this is a giant debate. So empiricism and rationalism. And Christians have historically been in both camps. So empiricism, rationalism. Empiricism says that all knowledge is derived from the five senses. All knowledge comes through the senses. So think of taste, smell, touch, see, feel. So the five senses. So all knowledge is derived or comes through the five senses. And typically associated with that is this idea of a tabula rasa. Tabula rasa, right? So who is someone that is known for this? It's going to be John Locke, who influenced the founding fathers of the United States. Right? He had a massive influence on Thomas Jefferson, but he also had a massive influence on Jonathan Edwards. So John Locke, he is a famous empiricist. So tabula rasa is the idea that we are a blank slate. We come into this world, we have no knowledge, we have no experience, and through sense data, comes through our five senses, the blank slate begins to have knowledge, begins to get perceptions, and those perceptions turn into knowledge. Okay, so empiricism, the idea that we gain knowledge through the five senses. Now, rationalism denies that. It says, no, we don't learn through the five senses. We learn through reason, and through reason alone. So there is a polarity between these two views. So through the five senses alone, through reason alone, right? And some of the famous rationalists we can think of. So we can think of René Descartes. He would be a big one. So we'll put Descartes. Well, actually, we don't need to put it down here. But René Descartes, Gottfried Leibniz. So there's quite a few, right? But in Christian tradition, it would be St. Augustine would be an example of a rationalist, right? And so we learn through, typically, at least in the Christian context, there would be an affirmation of the divine logos, the idea that the Son, Jesus Christ, gives us knowledge directly, independent of our five senses. He illuminates our minds directly, right? Some people think of this as in terms of telepathy, but that's not the right way of understanding it. It's that God uses means, and so although it seems like we're learning through our five senses are merely the means in which God bestows knowledge upon us. But it's not the five senses that furnishes us or that confers to us knowledge. It's actually the divine logos. It's the Son of God that gives it to us directly through. Well, I guess it is mediately through, not immediate, but mediately through the senses. But the senses in and of themselves do not give us knowledge. It's going to be revelation and reason. Okay, so empiricism, rationalism. So these are deep topics. Now on top of that, there's this issue called Agrippa's trilemma. I think sometimes it's called Albert's trilemma too. And there's a famous German story that is used to try and articulate this. And I'll try to pull up the German name for this trilemma. It's called a Munchausen trilemma, right? Often it's associated with the Greek skeptic Agrippa. But Agrippa's trilemma is important. Munchausen or Agrippa's trilemma, it is going to be extremely important because it helps us to try and deal with how do we justify what we believe. So how do we justify our beliefs? Because every belief that we have, so a belief aims at truth. If we follow Bernard Williams, belief aims at truth, belief targets truth. So when we take something to be true, when we believe something, we take it to be true. All right, so let's go through this Munchausen or Agrippa trilemma. So let's take a belief, a common belief. So one common belief, let's think of a belief that is not sensory dependent. So let's go this one. Let's go 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? So here's a belief, right? We believe 2 plus 2 equals 4. Now how do we know that? Right? How do we know that? So then this is where the trilemma comes. So we either affirm and assume axioms, right? Indisputable principles. Something that we take as a given, something that we assume is true as the building blocks in which we can have knowledge. So think in terms of geometry, you have axioms or postulates that you use to deduce theorems, right? So we take this as an axiom, that if you have 2 plus 2 equals 4. So there's axioms, okay? Axioms. The next one would be self-justifying principles. Okay. My pen is dying on me. Let's see here. All right, I'm going to have to do with the pen without it. Okay, so axioms, which typically is taken as dogmatically, something that is just assumed, so dogmatically. The next one is self-justifying, something that's self-justifying, a principle that you take to be self-justifying. And then the third is going to be, you take it that reasons are justified by further reasons. Right? Okay, so let's go into that. Why is it a trilemma? Well, the problem is if you take something as an axiom, well, you're taking a first principle and you're assuming that it's true to be able to gain beliefs that you take to be true. And so the problem is when you go through, right, when you see this big edifice, right? So you think of a building or a tower. Or maybe perhaps a better example would be think of a pyramid. So at a pyramid, you have all these beliefs and they're all based upon at the foundation something that's unprovable. Which means that at the end, all of your beliefs are established by something that cannot be proven. If you take something as self-justifying, then you end up committing circular reasoning. Right? Which is in Latin petitiae principii. It's this idea that you end up begging the question or committing circular reasoning. And then the last one, which I wasn't able to put on the board, is you end up committing what is called an infinite regress. So if you affirm a belief, and then you say that belief is based upon this other belief, and that belief is based upon another, and another, and another, and it just keeps going on infinity, at no point is there ever a point in which you stop. It just keeps going on and on and on. And the problem is if you don't actually have a belief that can justify all these beliefs, then in the end, you are left with no foundation at all. Right? And the example that could be given is by Peter Kreeft. Peter Kreeft gives an example that is similar to this, is the idea that when we take existence, right, we can discuss existence and consider an analogy. Think of book borrowing. So if you have books, right, and say you want to borrow a book from the church library. So you go to the church library, but they don't have it. They say that, Joe borrowed it. And then you go to Joe and say, Joe, can I borrow the book? And Joe says, well, I loaned it out to Bill, right? And this just keeps going on and on. If someone down the chain doesn't actually have the book, you'll never get it. And it's the same thing with beliefs. If you don't have a belief that is justified at the end, then all of your beliefs that are built upon all these other beliefs, you can't end up justifying them at all. And so the point of the trilemma is to show that if you take if you take axioms as unprovable and you assume them as first principles, you end up having arbitrariness. If you take beliefs that are self-justifying, you end up in circular reasoning. And if you take beliefs where you have this infinite regress, you end up with an infinite regress. And so it seems like none of these ways can justify beliefs. Now, each one of these, there's a name for each one of them. So this first one would be considered foundationalism. The second one would be coherentism. And then the third one would be finitism. Or maybe it's infantism. So in epistemology, you could see how all of this is going to be intertwined with how do we justify what we take to be true. Well, as Christians, we have some room. So some Christians take foundationalism. And so if my pen will work here, one of the most famous ones is going to be Alvin Plantinga. Alvin Plantinga. And then for self-justifying, as far as I can tell, and it's difficult to tell, but Paul Helm, he takes some type of coherentism, and so does, at least this is how I read, Cornelius Van Til. I read him as affirming some type of coherentism. Gordon H. Clark, he seems to affirm some type of foundationalism, which he calls dogmatism, right? And then finitism, I don't know of any Christians that affirm that, right? But this is going to be helpful to give you an idea of Christian theology, Christian philosophy, and how they relate to each other. All right, so let's do some constructive theology here, constructive philosophy. So there's been various opinions in theology on how we should understand Christian epistemology. How do we know what we know? Now the core, at least from the Christian tradition, is we affirm sola scriptura. Right? Sola scriptura. And then we're going to use reason. So it's going to go revelation, which would be sola scriptura. Right? So revelation, reason, and then I'm going to use the term tradition, but you can use the term history. So we're going to use, revelation is going to be our ultimate authority. And then subordinate authorities is going to be reason and tradition. And sometimes they talk about how revelation is the majesty, and then reason and tradition is going to be the ministers that we use, right? And you can think of a three-legged stool, right? Think of a three-legged stool. On this three-legged stool, or you can think of a triangle. At the top, you're going to have revelation. And then at the bottom, you're going to have reason and tradition. Okay? So for truth, we don't discount tradition. We don't deny those that have come before us. We want to stand on the shoulder of giants in the faith. But Scripture is going to be our ultimate authority, right? When it comes to truth, we believe God has clearly revealed himself in Scripture. This is going to be the mind of God to us. This is going to be God's self-disclosure. And then we're going to use reason and tradition to help us to understand. But Scripture, there's this spiral in hermeneutics in which Scripture is always correcting our understanding and clarifying it. Now, how do we gain that knowledge? Well, as I stated, St. Augustine took it that God does it. It's God that does it. It's not our five senses, it's God. Right? Whereas Jonathan Edwards and others, they are going to argue that no, God uses the five senses. We truly do learn through our five senses. Now, that may seem very strange to you that there's differences of opinion on that. And I don't have time to go into those debates, but this is just an example for you to see how philosophy can be helpful in theology, especially when it comes to apologetics. Peace and God bless.